Welcome back to the Starborn Parenting Podcast. I'm Rick Cabina.
And I'm Madeline Jurgensen.
Madeline, I just was playing Hungry Hippos with a 4.5-year-old. And what she kept doing, the way you win, I don't know if you've played that game before. Have you played it?
Yes.
Okay, it's a classic. And for those of you who might not have played it, you got these 4 plastic hippos, and then there's these red little marbles and then 1 yellow marble. And if you get the yellow marble, you win. So my dear little darling Drew kept taking that yellow marble and she would put it in front of one of the things and she'd be like, I want to be the yellow hippo. And then I want to be this one. And guess what? She won 9 out of 10 times. And in this moment, this is a little bit of, is it cheating? Is it making the game a little bit easier for it to win? However, how do you classify that behavior? If it is cheating, how do I deal with it as a parent? And this is something that if you're a parent or grandparent, this is just the stuff that you're going to come across all the time. How do you classify these behaviors? Is it bad? Do you intervene or don't you intervene? And that's going to be the topic of what we're going to go through today.
Great. I'm excited. Let's go.
All right. So we have 4 buckets. Consider these 4 buckets. And the reason why we have to come up with these 4 buckets is when you're a parent, kids are just trying to figure out how to live in this world. This is what it's about being a kid. You don't understand the social rules. You don't know if you say something, if it's mean or not. And especially this is with the younger kids. And then as you age, there's power dynamics, then there's humor. And part of the way of being funny is saying things that are maybe inappropriate. Well, that can be okay in some aspects. Other times it can't be. And plus raising kids also, you have values that you want to instill in kids. You want them to be well liked. You want them to do certain things. And we need a way of being able to understand that this is when teaching is required. This might be, you know what, just let that go. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt anyone else. And I guess when you think about it, we as parents have to decide what are these buckets. We'll go over them in a second, but I can think back to a story with one of my kids, and I have downstairs, I work out, I have a little home gym, and I would have this pencil in a notebook, and I was always write things. And that pencil was gone every day. And I would tell my kids who were down there, like, don't take this pencil. This is dad's. I want to use it. I don't want to be looking for it. And I started getting angry over this. I know it sounds like a stupid thing, but this is where we are in life. And it's like, this is the one thing. I want my freaking pencil here. Don't take this pencil because I want to write it. And you're downstairs. You don't want to go upstairs again. As I'm recounting this story, believe me, I've gone over it a lot of times. But one time that pencil was gone. And one of my kids was down there. I'm like, did you take this pencil? I told you not to take this pencil. And I was angry. And then, there was little tears welling up in the eyes. And I'm like, just leave these pencils here. And after this child goes upstairs, guess what? That pencil was on the floor. So here I was getting angry over nothing. And I raised my voice, upset one of my kids over nothing. And I'm sure you could relate to stories like that where you either overreacted or you underreacted to something.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And my husband and we kind of always go back to what are our moral pillars in our household? What are the behaviors that we really want to see in this moment? And what are ones that we can just let go? I mean, this happens at the dinner table all the time where it's like, should my daughter be eating soup with a fork? Probably not, but, like, is it a new like, what was today already a tough day? Like, is she eating something? Sure. Then we're just gonna let it go with the fork. And, like, yeah, if she continues to do this day after day and it becomes a problem, then we can address it. But these one-off times where it's like, whatever, just eat it with the fork. I don't care. But yeah, I mean, when these behaviors come up, I also, you start getting really frustrated. And I think when one thing that I noticed by myself is that if my reaction to that behavior is disproportionate, like if a child's eating with a fork, should I really be getting that upset about it? Probably not. That probably means that I'm carrying frustration from lots of previous behaviors that day, and it has nothing to do with my daughter eating soup with a fork. So that's the time to just let that one go.
Yeah. This is exactly it. We want to help people understand that you can triage behaviors
Mhm.
and you don't need to treat all behaviors the same way. And I wish that I had this framework and that I did it because I'd have been a better parent. But that's the thing about life and that's the thing about everything. If you want to get better at something, you need to educate yourself. And even though I was a behavior analyst, I mean, hell, when I was raising my kids, I was a professor and I taught this stuff. And these were things that you can't escape gravity. It's like, you're the physics professor. Just because you know a lot about physics doesn't mean you're going to start floating away. And it's the same thing with behavior science. Just because you know a lot about it and you could teach it to other people doesn't mean you can wield the proper tools in the moment. You need to teach yourself that. And of course, through time, I learned how to do this better. So these are the there's four things that we want to talk about today and give parents these four buckets so that they can understand what should you do. And this first bucket is one that nobody talks about. Most of the time in parenting, you're talking about the other three buckets, which are, hey, there's behaviors that we want to get rid of. The first bucket is called growth behaviors. And these are things that we want the kids to do more of. And you and I just had a long conversation about this the last time. You may have heard the phrase catch 'em being good. We talked about tag, don't nag, which it comes out of behavior science and it talks about pick the behavior that you want to see more of, tag it, reinforce it so that you tell the person that, hey, you're doing this right. And I'm sure you can think of many different things like this, but if we don't understand that there are behaviors that we need to explicitly look at, then we're going to miss them.
Yep. Yeah, but one of the stories that comes to my mind with this one is that my mom came to visit maybe a year ago or 6 months ago. I forget when it was, but my daughter at the time, my older daughter, had just kind of started to put words into sentences, started requesting more instead of just pointing and making sounds. Like she was starting to really communicate. And my mom immediately started trying to add please and thank yous to it. So my daughter would say,
Yeah.
banana, and my mom would say, please, banana. And I had to kind of pull her off to the side and ask her not to do that because my mom is great with kids. She's wonderful. I love that she can come and help. But my daughter was just kind of starting to ask using words. And I didn't want to add on this additional thing to her right now. Like I wanted to reinforce the fact that she was starting to use words. And so when she asked for a banana, she got a banana. And now that she's older, we're adding in those please and thank yous. But
Yeah.
it wasn't necessary at that time.
The definition of growth behaviors is simply stuff we want more of. You wanted more language, and moms and grandparents, as I am now one, you're not with the kids all the time, so you might miss out on things. So that's a perfect story. Mom, your mom, doing what great moms, grandmas do. You want to always shape up behavior, but there's a time and a place. So I really like that idea. I think back to when I had kids, and one of the things that I explicitly looked at is, do they play nice together? And
Mm.
when they played nice together, I said something, I would randomly break out a popsicle, like, I would reward that behavior in some capacity because guess what happens? What's the opposite of not playing nice together? Fighting, arguing. As a matter of fact, back to my Hungry Hippos story, young Rowan, who he's 2.5, he doesn't understand. He kind of understands the game, and that is you get the yellow marble and you win. So he would just pick the yellow marble up and then we can't play the game, and then so Drew gets upset, and he just doesn't get it, and so this happened, like, 2 days in a row with the Hungry Hippo. Being able to reward a behavior so that you don't have that fighting, and in this particular instance, he's just a little bit too young for that game, so it's a little challenging to teach him that, but that was a perfect, very fresh instance of the fighting that you want to avoid, and all kids are gonna do it. Catch them being good.
Mhm.
Reward those behaviors.
Yeah, that's so important. Like reinforcing those sibling relationships early on will help keep them, good friends for life. And with my older daughter, she's just loves on my younger daughter so hard. Like all she wants to do
Yeah.
is just hold her and cuddle her and lay on top of her. But the baby's only like 4 months old, so it's like that's a heavy person, like a 2.5-year-old to be, well, 2-year old to be laying on top. And so we have to kind of shape that behavior. Where like I want to enforce the idea that she loves her sister and wants to cuddle her and be with her, but it's sort of like shaping that behavior of, oh, like let's hold baby this way, or you can touch her, you can pat on her belly, or you can give her kisses on her head, maybe not on her eyeballs. And it's like close, but just shifting it a little bit, but still trying to enforce that positive sibling relationships.
This this is something that all parents should do. They should have a list of behaviors that they want to reward, and there should be, like, if it's a hot 5 or a hot 10 list, I'm looking for these things today. I loved when my kids would entertain themselves by reading books. Yeah, you could go downstairs, and back then it was the GameCube when I had kids, and they could play video games, but I'd rather have them reading books. And things like cleaning up after dinner, I that was another thing that, my wife would, uh, clean up the dishes, I would sometimes clean up the dishes, but having the kids do it taught them skills. So these were things that we could have done as parents, and sometimes we would do it just because we're in a hurry, but having them do it, like, there's a whole host of behaviors that you need to pick so that they can grow.
Yeah, and I love the idea of actually writing it down.
Yeah,
That's, because then you're kind of holding yourself accountable. It's a time for you and your husband or wife to get aligned with what your behaviors are looking for, and, because 2 heads is better than 1 when you're trying to reinforce these.
yeah. And this is part of the Starborn app, which there could be other apps. If you don't wanna have an app to track it, we live in an era of digital magic. Just pull open a Google Sheet or whatever helps you, or like you said, just write it down. Okay, let's talk about the second bucket. These are called low impact habits. Think about this as the small stuff. This is something I'm gonna admit I'm guilty of, and I have done this my whole life. I bite my nails. And I don't do it in public because I realize it's a bad habit, but when I'm nervous, I bite my nails. And it's something that, because I've always done it by myself, no parent was there to really correct that. But if you're a parent and you see your kids biting your nails, is that something that you should intervene with? Now, the fact that I bite my nails hasn't affected my life in any way. Is that something, if you see a nail biter, something that you should intervene? Sometimes kids just will figure this out, like, oh, if or picking your nose, like, well, maybe that is something that starts to bleed into the next bucket that we talk about. But there are some behaviors that are gonna be shaped up by kids. If you're on a playground or you're with your friends and you do something like that, what's the first thing they're gonna say? "Ew, gross. You're picking your nose." And then you're socially punished for doing those things, so some of these things will work their way out. And the small stuff, we need to identify this and understand, is this something that we should intervene with?
Mhm. Yeah, it reminds me, I worked with a client once who she was entering middle school, so a little bit older, but she had more severe symptoms of autism, and she had a little stuffies that she would carry around with her all the time. And we just let it go because it was something that was comforting to her, and she really enjoyed having them around. but she was starting to enter that middle school where kids are gonna be less okay with you walking around with a stuffed animal. We don't want her to become more socially isolated than she was because kids thought she was weird or something and start teasing her. So instead of having her completely, well, we had two kids like this. One of them was a boy, and he carried around like all these action figures, toys, and we got him to leave them at the in like the office. So he'd come in off the bus. He had like a special bed in the principal's office that he got to put the toys into, and then he went on the rest of his day. But for the girl, she had a little bit more severe symptoms of autism, and so instead we gave her a fanny pack. And she put the stuffed animal in the fanny pack, so she had it with her, but it was kinda hidden, and then she had a cool fanny pack, and, like, it was no problem. But this is one of those things where it was a low impact behavior, and it wasn't a problem in elementary school, but then when she got to middle school, it was like, "Okay, let's come up with a new plan," and it worked out really well.
Yeah, that's a great story. The question in this category of low impact behaviors isn't how do I fix it? It's more, should I fix it?
Mhm,
Is this
mhm,
something that you should intervene with? One of the things that bugs me, and this bugged me with my kids, and even to this day, is when you're eating with your mouth open.
mm,
Should that be something that you should fix or you should not fix? And who knows? Each person that you share that with is going to have a different opinion on it. If 99% of the people say, "Oh yeah, eating with the mouth open is a terrible thing to do. It's going to have terrible social repercussions," then sure, that can help you understand, is this something you should intervene with or not? But if it's not, then should you intervene with it?
mhm. Yeah, my daughter had a have, like, 2 weeks where she was putting on multiple pairs of underwear. And we were like she'd get dressed and she'd put on like 2, maybe 3 pairs of underwear. And my husband was like, "Should we stop her?" And I'm like, "It's not hurting her." And it's like
Yeah.
and then it stopped after about 2 weeks. Now she wears 1 again. But there was like a 2-week stretch where like she might be wearing 4 pairs of underwear. I don't know. But like, we let it go.
There's a 5-year test that you could think about as a parent. And I think it's important to say again that you and I are just talking about these buckets. We're not telling parents what goes in this bucket. Each parent needs to decide what goes in the bucket. What are behaviors you want to grow? We talked about that. And what are these low impact behaviors that you say, should we really do this? Is this something that I should teach? And the 5-year test means, will this matter in 5 years? Your
Mm,
daughter putting on 2 pair of underwear for a while, she happened to go out of that. Now, if that were something that were going on in 5 years, would that really matter? Then maybe you decide, okay, maybe this is something that I should intervene with. If it's not, you can do very gentle coaching as a parent. There are ways that we also said that you just mentioned. A lot of this low impact stuff's just going to go away. Like
mhm,
nail biting can go away. Thumb sucking, that is another thing that can resolve itself in time, and depending on the behavior, you decide as the parent, should this be something that really matters or doesn't matter? And those low impact behaviors are very important because, as these next two buckets we're going to talk about, you don't want to be the parent that's intervening on every single thing. I had a friend who loved his son, and I was able to watch this friend raise a son through the years. And this parent, this dad, would be on his son constantly for
mm.
every little thing that he did. Like if he would if we were walking somewhere, and what do kids do if there happens to be a sidewalk or there happens to be a ledge like a wall? They're gonna walk on that wall. Get down from that wall. Yeah, do you need to constantly be on, like, that's a perfect example. Should you be correcting your kid for walking on the wall? Sure, if the wall is 8 feet tall, that's a safety issue, but if it's just a little thing, kids do these kinds of things. So, I hope that parents, if you're as you're listening to this, you start thinking, here's my bucket of growth behaviors. These are low impact behaviors, and I'm going to have a serious conversation with myself, with the spouse. Are these things we need to intervene with?
Mhm. So smart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the third bucket. And these are called moderate social disruptors. So we had low impact habits, and these are things that's the small stuff. This is stuff that's not going to blow up your house today, but if you leave it alone, then it's going to make life very much harder. And a perfect example of this is telling lies. I can I've had 3 kids. We've been through the phase where they were doing sneaky shit. They didn't wanna tell me, and they would tell lies to me because they knew if I knew the truth, this would be something that I might react in a way that I would intervene so that they're not doing this stuff. And, uh, that is something that would be this moderate social disruptor. You don't want people to be telling lies all the time because then what kind of person is that? What kind of relationships are you going to have as you grow up through the world? And that's something that you would have to intervene with.
Mhm. Yeah, my daughter, she had a bad habit of she was normally really good with sharing, but she went through this phase where she would when someone would take something from her, she'd rip it back and scream no. And I was like, nope, we're not doing that. Like, if you're going to communicate with somebody your feelings, you do it at a normal level. Like, and that, like the screaming is one that's a big no-no in our house, and we try to stop that because it's just if you bring that to the playground, you bring that to a group of friends, it's just not a good way to communicate.
Yeah. How about getting attention in ways that you might think are annoying? Back in the day, I can clearly remember when I was growing up being around kids who would do things because they wanted attention. And I had one friend who happened to be, how would I say this politely, an exaggerator. He would just tell stories that were either wildly exaggerated or they frankly weren't true. And he was always trying to tell us how rich he was and how rich his parents were. And he's like, yeah, when I'm 16, my parents are going to buy me a Corvette. They already have this one picked out for me and blah, blah, blah. Of course, when he was 16, he didn't get a Corvette. He never got a Corvette. But he would tell all these stories all the time. And as we went through high school, this is who this kid became. And this is that 5-year rule that we talked about with the 5-year test that we talked about with the low impact behaviors. If this is going to be something that's going to affect the person in 5 years, then yes, this is something you should intervene with. And my friend, I haven't talked with him in many years, but I often think about him and I wonder, where is he in life right now? And is he still having these exaggerated claims? Maybe as you get older, you grow out of these things. Maybe you don't.
Yeah, and that I think that's the risk with these, like, moderate social disruptors in that you
Yeah.
don't know exactly how like, you have to really use that five-year plan, like, how is this gonna look in the future? Like, because, telling lies as a child, your, peers are gonna see that differently than when you're an adult. I worked with this one client once who, had a real problem with like, been having a conversation with somebody you would say some sort of topic, and then instead of talking on that topic, he would immediately switch to something completely different.
Mm,
And we were doing a lot of, like, social skill training with him because as younger kids, when you're like 8, 9, and if you listen to a group of 8 or 9-year-olds talk, especially boys, sorry boys, but they're
yeah.
switching topics like every 5 seconds. Like they're just talking over each other, at each other, parallel conversations are going on, and it's not a problem. But if you continue that until they're, high school or an adult, and you're trying to have a conversation, if I'm trying to have a conversation with an adult and they switch topics on me every single time I talk, it's you're not going to want to talk to them anymore. And, like, these are those things you have to think about, like, it might be a okay behavior in elementary school, it becomes less okay in middle school, high school, and beyond.
Yeah. The trap that parents fall into is that no single instance of a behavior is a pattern yet. But if you keep letting it slide, it can become a pattern. Think
Mhm.
about a child who steals a cookie or takes a cookie without permission. I guess it's stealing if you say no cookies and they take it. They take it once, okay, fine. They were hungry, they didn't take it. Then you give them a rule and say, "Look, you need to ask for permission for cookies." You let it slide. They keep doing it. They keep doing it. After time, this pattern has been rewarded for a very long period of time. And then the children either think that the rule that you said, like, oh, mom and dad aren't going to say anything about this. They never really get upset about it. But now this is something that they just do. They just take things, even though that's a rule. This is something that you should address. The other trap is treating everything like a crisis. And when that happens, kids are going to either escalate with you or they're going to shut down. So it's very important to understand when you're in these moderate social disruptors, what do you do in this instance? These are times when you should be teaching. How do you teach somebody who's stealing things? Well, you give them some kind of replacement skill. You give them a social skill. Ask for permission. Sometimes you're going to get no for an answer. Sometimes you might get yes for an answer. Let's practice this. I'm going to tell you no. I'm going to give you a no answer. And you practice it with them because it's hard getting no for an answer. But if you practice these skills, these replacement behaviors, then it's going to be much better. So if you have things in this bucket, these are things that you should say, all right, we're going to teach. Again, the purpose of us having this conversation isn't to talk about all the things that you should do in each one of these when these behaviors occur in one of these buckets, but just to understand that you as a parent should have this classification so now it's time to teach. I think I'll ignore that thing. Here are some behaviors I want to happen more and more.
Mhm. And so what happens now when a behavior you don't want to see it, but it's not a teaching moment? What do we call those?
Yeah, you have nailed it. We are at the crisis stage.
Yeah.
We have crisis behaviors. You can also think about these as high risk behaviors, but these are things where you need to make sure the child's safe and you are safe and everyone else around there, if siblings are there or whoever's there, that safety is a precaution. And when these high risk or crisis behaviors occur, the main thing is you need to keep people safe. You need to de escalate the situation. We could spend a whole podcast talking about how you do this, but you need to recognize when kids are in crisis. I mean, have you ever had kids that you can think of that you worked with who had crisis behaviors, but weren't necessarily the kind of crisis behaviors that people think of when someone's on the floor, they're throwing a tantrum, they're kicking their feet, they're smacking things? I mean, it could look different for different kids.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things, like my daughter has tantrums, but you can snap her out of them pretty quickly, either like making a joke or like trying to understand what she's trying to do, and that's where like I can communicate her kind of down off the ledge a little bit because it's just like a mild tantrum. But kids that I've worked with in clinics and schools, those crisis behaviors are not ones that I'm going to start having a conversation with those kids. Those are the ones where I'm trying to keep them safe, move them to an area that they can attack somebody, or keep them so they're not hurting themselves, or staff members. And those are the behaviors I call like the super hot behaviors, where they're just like they're at another level. Where, and I think as a parent, when your child goes from being a normal tantrum to that high level crisis behavior, you know when it happens. That's like when their nervous system goes offline, they're not responding to you, they are in full panic mode. These are also the behaviors where often once you bring them back down, they're kind of lethargic. I've seen that a lot with the kids. It's like when they hit true crisis mode and they kind of cool down, they're kind of tired and emotionally kind of drawn out because of how tough this was on their body to physically go through this crisis. And those are the times when you are not trying to rationalize with them. You're just trying to keep them safe.
Yeah. I can remember when I was working on my master's student, in Columbus, I worked for this agency, and we had a young man who was a teenager, and he was going to live with a foster family, and I was there to help with the transition. And sure enough, we're sitting at the table and we're eating food, and this kid just whacks me in the mouth, like
Mm,
literally out of nowhere. And we all just looked for a minute, and I was like, what happened? But at that moment, the idea was safety first. And of course, he followed that up after that second with lunging at me, and it was like a
mm,
full he was attacking me, and we later surmised that he was very upset. He didn't understand. He was scared. He didn't have the speech to talk about these things. He didn't have the vocabulary, well, the vocal language. He was non-vocal, and at that moment, giving a lecture or uh, trying to teach or give a consequence, that was not the time to do that. It was time for him to be safe, for me to be safe, for everyone to be safe. And you're right that what did you call them? Hot behaviors?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like
I
they're
love
getting hot.
that. Coming in hot.
Yeah.
So you're right. This is something that parents can get. And as we continue having these conversations, we'll talk more about how do you handle behaviors in these situations. But the big idea that we talked about today is that there are these different categories that parents should understand, that every behavior that occurs isn't necessarily a teaching opportunity. And we've just nailed a couple of them. In those low impact behaviors, maybe you don't teach. At the crisis time, hey, that's not a time to teach. In the moderate social disruptors, sure, you can teach there. So understanding that we have growth behaviors, you're looking to reward those low impact behaviors, stay calm, coach gently, pick your battles. These moderate behaviors, yes, intervene early, figure out ways to be good teachers. And there are even ways before the behavior you can set yourself up for success. And then these high risk behaviors where it's safety first, teach later. That's the big thing to understand for you as a parent, for your spouse. And if there's other people, if you have an extended family, you got to teach them too. Because as you told a good story about your mom. I'm a grandparent, my wife's a grandparent, and we need to respect boundaries. And if my daughter and son-in-law, if they have very specific ways of classifying the behavior, us going in and teaching, there can be a conflict there. Very important that we get this out there.
Yeah, I think it also kind of it opens parents up and gives them a little bit of grace in that you don't to be a good parent, you don't have to teach in every single moment. Like you don't have to address every single behavior your child's doing because you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be burned out, and you're not going to be effective in the behaviors that you want to be effective in. So it's like think of like behavior analysis and teaching as like really high potent I don't know, like cure or drug, and it's you wanna place it exactly where you wanna put it in, but you don't wanna just do it overkill. You wanna, be very, very precise about when you use it, and then you'll see the good benefits.
Yeah, it's so true. I hope that this is something that is very clear. We'll put this up in the show notes just so it's very obvious. And of course, there's other places that you could read more about this, but maybe do some homework. And this week, after listening to this, think about some behaviors that your kid does, or maybe you watch them and say, what bucket would this go into? Write it down. Now, not to
Mm,
change anything else, but just start taking stock of what your child does and decide, which behavior, which bucket does it go into? And maybe you talk to your spouse or anyone else that's involved with your child and say, You do this. Here's some behaviors. I want you to classify them. And that would be really interesting. And here's some bonus homework, catch your kid being good,
Mhm.
whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. Start building that relationship. The more positive you are, the better that relationship's going to turn out to be.
Yeah. I love that.
That's
That's
it.
so important. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us as we help build better humans.
We'll see you next week.